Okay, so today we'll try to see if my phone is any better. And our topic of today is talking about the WHO and all the controversy over them. Were they biased? I think we'll start off talking about how do we define whether somebody did something wrong if we're looking in hindsight. The problem is when you're looking in hindsight, you have a lot of extra information that you did not know back then. I know lots of people like to say 2 numbers doesn't make a trend. Well, 3 actually doesn't either. There's no such thing as knowing a trend until after the fact. If you look at the stock market, many people have predictions. Most of them are wrong. Some are right. It's basically the same as flipping a coin. You don't know. I will say, starting off, that the WHO recommendations are too slow. But is that its goal? Is that its mission? When it recommends something, the world generally follows it, so it has a lot of responsibility in, quote, getting it right. But is accuracy more important than timeliness? Like a textbook is always behind. We know by the time it comes out in print, it's out of date. But we expect it to be. It takes a long time. It's the established knowledge, and some of it is actually wrong by the time it comes out. Some journals, like The Lancet, are very, very up-to-date, maybe more future than up-to-date. But they're also sometimes wrong. Some people would say often. So let's go first and look at the Constitution of the WHO. Let's look at their mission statement. So, under their Constitution, Chapter 1, Objective, Article 1, the objective of the World Health Organization, hereinafter called the organization, shall be the attainment by all peoples of the highest possible level of health. Very broad, very general, not much to say, right? Let's look at Chapter 2, Functions. They have a lot of different things there involved. To act as the directing and coordinating authority on international health work, establish and maintain effective collaboration with the UN, specialized agencies, governmental health administrations, professional groups, and such other organizations that may deem appropriate, blah, 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 right? Until we go down to G, to stimulate and advance work to eradicate epidemic, endemic, and other diseases. So this is actually part of their scope, dealing with epidemics, or like this current coronavirus pandemic. So now that we established it is actually their job dealing with this, let's sort of see about what they've done. So I looked through the news articles reporting in the beginning of February, January, so not in March or April when much more was known about this virus. And there was a group of senators who asked the WHO to let Taiwan participate. They're saying they're excluding Taiwan from their meetings, which is correct. They were excluding Taiwan from their meetings, saying that it's part of China, and China is going to give them that information. There's another article talking about how Taiwan says that China is misreporting information. At the time, China said there were 13 cases, there is actually only 10. And it is sort of something that may be lost in translation. Is China reporting information from me back to Taiwan? I don't think so. Taiwan's saying no, China's saying yes, but you can't trust China in the sense that, just because they say yes doesn't mean it was done. You would think Taiwan, the organization who wants to know this information, would actually know whether they got data. The WHO did not respond to Taiwan's request. So, that's, I would say, is showing that they're not responsive to Taiwan. And, there's also a lot of misinformation they're saying about, the WHO labeling Taiwan as part of China, and thus you have, all these bans on travel to Taiwan when Taiwan's doing much better than China. So I would say that, did the WHO block Taiwan from joining its meetings? The answer is an obvious yes. Does it matter? Did it matter? I think Taiwan actually did a better job because they investigate things themselves instead of relying on the WHO. They're very much on top of things. They had very few cases. And they're very close to China, obviously. The WHO says it's not political, but the fact that it is political because it has to sort of look out for the interests of its donors, for its member states. I participated in Model United Nations when I was in high school, and I learned that the UN is a very political organization. Did you know that many things don't get passed because there's people sitting on the Security Council and they block these resolutions from going through? So there's these countries that are considered permanent members of the UN Security Council. They're sort of the biggest countries in the world you can imagine: US, Russia, China. And so sometimes other countries want to sort of pass a resolution condemning this or that, but they'll be blocked. And there's no way to unblock. This accusation that the WHO and China downplay the dangers, well, I think that's more nebulous. They use the terms insufficient evidence. You can't argue with that. They didn't know at the time. I don't think they're trying to lie. They just said, I'm not sure. The CDC uses the same language. What about the WHO praising China's response? I actually think that was a good thing. Criticizing China does not help things. Look at all the times the international community has criticized China, like in their record of human rights. What did they accomplish? Nothing. A stick doesn't work for China. Carrots may work though. At least it's worth a shot. I would say the hard job is actually government's job, not the WHO. When they speak, they have to speak from a position of authority. They can't afford to be wrong. And so it's sort of like when a volcano is about to erupt. It's great the more notice you give the people who live around the volcano, but say you tell them a week in advance. I think our science and technology just isn't good enough to tell them a week in advance and to be accurate. So let's say everybody evacuates. What happens then? Say the volcano doesn't erupt. You'll be criticized. The WHO's position is one of authority. They have to be sure what they say is right, and that's why they're so often delayed. Sort of like we talked about a textbook. I think we trust them when they say to do something. I think when they say not to do anything, we can't trust them, but that's somewhat different. I remember before this all blew up in the US, more than a month ago, in the beginning part of March, there was a radio host talking about this, and he was saying, what is the governor supposed to do? What is the mayor supposed to do? Well, you know you're going to have one of two scenarios. You're going to do too much, you're going to lock down too early, and you're not going to have that many people die, and people are going to criticize you for shutting down the economy and doing damage to the economy. Or you could not lock down and, not do anything until it's too late. And then lots of people die, and then you'll be criticized for letting people die. What will you choose? And he said the answer was obvious, and I think it is obvious. You have to choose to err on the side of not having enough people dying. And I think that's where this whole idea of the WHO is wrong. That's not their mission statement. They're not making decisions for governments. They're giving recommendations that are good, high-quality recommendations when they do recommend something, I would say, not when they don't recommend something. And the governments have to make decisions. And Trump did not decide to do anything until much later. In fact, I think he actually hasn't decided to do much anyways. He wasn't the one who ordered a lockdown. Governors have been. And some states are still not locked down. And South Dakota has a lot of people, getting it right now. I think that's what we have to understand, the difference between the World Health Organization and governments. It's not a government. It doesn't actually have the power to enforce things, it just makes recommendations. Just like most of the other UN organizations, they just make their recommendations. They don't have the power to do anything. They think this is probably the best thing to do. They do some research. The whole thing about being political, unfortunately, you just can't avoid that it is a political organization. In the very beginning, Tedros, who is not a physician, by the way, he is a doctor by the way of a PhD, not a medical degree. He wanted to nominate Mugabe to be a goodwill ambassador, and Mugabe is the one with a horrendous record of having killing many, many people. And he backed down when there is a lot of uproar from all the people who sponsored the WHO. That is political, obviously. From the very beginning it has been political, and it can't not be political. But I think we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where some people try to do what's right, and they may not succeed. And the question is, what is the role of the WHO going on from here on? Should they be more on the ball in the sense of adapting to new things before they've sort of been obviously understood? I think that's a difficult question, but I don't think so. I think they're putting everything together. But when we say putting everything together, the people who put everything together are not the people on the front line. The people on the front line don't see the whole picture, like these doctors in China who raised the alarm. They see that there's something that needs to be done, but they're not clear what the response is either. I think if you ask Dr. Lee, he would say he's not sure what the right thing to do is. I think he'd be correct. I don't think any of us know. That's where governments come into play. I think the WHO has some information about what should be done. I think they were slower in coming out with recommendations, saying there is not enough evidence, but I think they have a very high bar for evidence. And I think that's their prerogative. That's the way they work. I think it's up to governments to take not enough evidence and to see what to do with it, because they're the ones with the responsibility to their people to make a decision, good or bad. Their people will suffer. So that's the end of our discussion today about the WHO, and we'll see if my voice is better using my phone to record.